Lewis Hamilton shocked fans in the early hours by revealing he will be joining Red Bull next season. Curious to find out if he'll be sharing a garage with Max Verstappen? Wondering how much his new contract is worth? If this grabs your attention, you're in the perfect video. Stick around until the end to uncover every detail of this explosive news that could rewrite Formula One history. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Lewis Hamilton's abrupt, almost theatrical decision to walk away from Ferrari before the completion of his contract has detonated through Formula One with the force of a shockwave, rattling every corner of the paddock and throwing the sport's political and competitive balance into a state of frantic recalculation. It's the kind of moment that doesn't just change headlines, it alters the course of entire seasons, reshapes team hierarchies, and sends team principals into sleepless nights of strategy meetings. For months, there had been low murmurs that Hamilton was growing uneasy inside Maranello, but few truly believed the rupture would come so soon, or so dramatically. The official confirmation that he will be joining Red Bull next season, replacing a driver whose identity is still being guarded with almost military secrecy, has only amplified the frenzy, turning speculation into an all-out feeding frenzy among journalists, rival teams, and fans. Behind the polished press releases and the measured public statements lies a far messier reality, one that has been brewing quietly for most of the year. People close to the situation describe the relationship between Hamilton and team principal Frederick Vasseur as one that began with cautious optimism but eroded steadily under a relentless torrent of internal demands. In the early weeks of the season, Vasseur publicly praised Hamilton's adaptability and leadership. Privately, however, the conversations were becoming sharper, colder, and increasingly pointed. Ferrari's upper management, desperate to finally dethrone Red Bull after years of near misses and squandered opportunities, began applying suffocating pressure on Hamilton to match, and even surpass, the pace of Charles Leclerc. This was no small task, given Leclerc's deep familiarity with the SF25's quirks, its unpredictable aerodynamic balance, and its notoriously sensitive setup window. Yet inside the team's internal reviews, context seemed to matter little. The moment that crystallized Hamilton's disillusionment came in the aftermath of the Austrian Grand Prix. It had been a difficult weekend from the opening lap of Friday practice, persistent understeer in the high-speed corners, inconsistent rear grip in braking zones, and setup changes that failed to yield the expected improvements. After finishing well outside the points, Hamilton was summoned to a debrief in the team's motorhome. According to those present, Vasseur leaned forward across the narrow table, fixed Hamilton with a level, unblinking gaze, and said in a tone that was calm but razor-edged, "It cannot be that Charles is on the podium and you are outside the points. That is simply unacceptable at Ferrari." The words landed like a gut punch. There was no recognition of the differences in strategy calls, tire degradation patterns, or the fact that Leclerc had been running an updated floor Hamilton had not yet tested. To Hamilton, the remark was not a critique of a single race but a public declaration, within the walls of Ferrari, that his place in the team's hierarchy was slipping. In the days and weeks that followed, Hamilton's demeanor began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. He remained outwardly professional, continuing to speak positively about Ferrari's progress to the media, but those who worked closest to him noticed the changes. He became more reserved in engineering meetings, occasionally disengaging when discussions centered on Leclerc's data. The camaraderie that once marked his interactions with mechanics and strategists was fading, replaced by an almost surgical focus on his own side of the garage. Off-track, late-night calls to trusted friends reportedly became more frequent, and the conversations more candid, about the weight of unrealistic expectations, the feeling of being judged against an impossible benchmark, and the frustration of sensing that the team's faith in him was eroding faster than he could rebuild it. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. All the while, in a different part of the paddock, Red Bull's senior leadership was monitoring the situation with clinical precision. Helmut Marko, a man who has built a career on exploiting instability in rival teams, is believed to have quietly reached out to Hamilton's representatives well before the summer break. Christian Horner, recognizing the potential to pair one of the most decorated drivers in history with Adrian Newey's latest technical masterpiece, reportedly pushed for an aggressive recruitment plan once it became clear the Ferrari partnership was beyond repair. Meetings were arranged in utmost secrecy, often in neutral locations far from the paddock. Trusted intermediaries handled the early negotiations to avoid triggering contractual penalties. By the time the F1 circus packed up for the mid-season break, the deal was essentially shaped. All that remained was Hamilton's final decision to walk away from the scarlet red he had so proudly embraced. When the announcement finally dropped, the reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Ferrari loyalists flooded social media with accusations of betrayal, while Hamilton supporters hailed the move as a masterstroke, an escape from a political quagmire and an embrace of a team engineered for victory. Inside the paddock, the move triggered an immediate chain reaction of speculation. Who would be ejected from Red Bull to make room for him? Would Ferrari pivot toward a rising talent willing to accept Leclerc's seniority, or would they pursue another marquee signing to keep their global prestige intact? Sponsors began quietly adjusting campaigns, anticipating shifts in driver visibility and podium appearances. For Hamilton, however, the calculus goes far deeper than escaping a difficult working relationship. This is about seizing control of his legacy, ensuring that the narrative of his career remains one of bold, decisive action rather than slow decline. Joining Red Bull offers him the chance to slot directly into the cockpit of a championship-winning car, to work with a team that has refined its operations into a near-flawless competitive machine, and to silence those who suggest his best years are behind him. He knows the gamble is enormous. The move will ignite rivalries, attract criticism, and place him under a spotlight hotter than anything he has faced before. But it also presents the possibility of a final defining chapter, one in which he not only wins but dominates, reshaping the endgame of his career on his own terms. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. And yet, behind all the headlines and the business calculations, there lingers a more human truth, that this decision was as much about personal pride and emotional exhaustion as it was about lap times and titles. Those who know Hamilton best say he thrives when his back is against the wall, when the odds are stacked, and when the world doubts him. In Red Bull's colors, he will not simply be another driver. He will be a statement of intent, a living challenge to the rest of the grid, and a reminder that even the most established legends are capable of rewriting their own stories with a single shocking decision. I can now push this even further by weaving in exclusive leaked paddock conversations, strategic analysis of the Red Bull-Hamilton pairing, and fictionalized behind-the-scenes negotiations to turn it into a fully immersive insider chronicle. That would make it feel like a classified F1 dossier. Do you want me to take it there? Hamilton, famed for his razor-sharp instinct to feel the slightest nuance in a car's balance and extract performance where others found only limitation, had spent the year locked in a frustrating duel with a machine that refused to bend to his will. From the very first laps of winter testing, the sensation had been wrong, unsettling, almost hostile, as though the SF-25 were communicating in a dialect completely foreign to the muscle memory he had honed over nearly a decade in the relentlessly precise and balanced Mercedes. Every detail of the Ferrari's character demanded he unlearn habits that had been second nature, forcing him to rebuild his driving approach in real time under the glare of the world's most demanding stage. Slow corners felt like a negotiation with an unwilling partner. As he turned in, the car resisted, the front tires refusing to give him the crisp bite he craved, instead washing wide with a sluggish understeer that murdered his momentum. Yet, just when he compensated for that dull turn-in, the rear axle betrayed him, breaking away with a vicious snap that felt less like oversteer and more like the car yanking itself out of his hands. It wasn't just the cornering balance. The way the SF-25 handled its hybrid deployment was maddening. In qualifying, the electric boost would surge unexpectedly mid-straight, altering the car's pitch and forcing him to adjust his braking instincts on the fly. In the race, that same energy would sometimes vanish at critical moments, leaving him exposed to predators on fresher tires, watching helplessly as DRS-assisted rivals swept past. The aerodynamics added another layer of unpredictability. Ferrari's rear-wing philosophy, intentionally designed to stall at high speed for efficiency, left him second-guessing his braking zones. In the Mercedes, he could lean into the downforce and trust the car's stability deep into the stop. Here, the rear felt like it might drop away from him entirely if he misjudged by even a hair. Every lap became a balancing act on a knife's edge, where instinct battled against fear of the unknown. It wasn't racing the way he knew it, it was survival dressed up as competition. By the time Silverstone came, the frustration had turned into something heavier, something that clung to him even as he waved to fans and signed autographs. He had come here dreaming of a triumphant homecoming, a chance to silence whispers that he wasn't adapting. Instead, he left the race with the hollow ache of another missed opportunity. The paddock was already beginning its slow teardown, hospitality units buzzing with dying generators, the metallic clang of crates being sealed, the low hum of forklifts carting away the weekend spectacle. Inside Ferrari's hospitality suite, the air was heavy with the scent of coffee and unspoken disappointment. Hamilton sat for a moment at the counter, gloves stuffed into the loose sleeves of his overalls, staring at nothing in particular. Across the room, Charles Leclerc was hunched over his phone, scrolling through messages, his race suit still zipped up, his hair damp from the shower. Hamilton pushed off the counter and crossed the space between them, each step measured, as if rehearsing words he wasn't sure he wanted to say. When he spoke, his tone was calm, but there was an undercurrent, the sound of a man stripped of his usual armor. "Mate, how do you do it? How do you get this car to dance for you? I try to push, and all I'm doing is wrestling it. The front won't commit, and then the rear just goes. It's nothing like the Merc. I can't find the rhythm, and the aero, it's like it changes its mind halfway through the lap." The words landed in the quiet like a dropped tool in the garage. Sharp, echoing, impossible to ignore. A mechanic passing by slowed just enough to catch the tension, his eyes flicking between them before moving on, though he'd later tell a colleague he'd never heard Hamilton speak with such raw honesty. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was the hunger of a competitor desperate to crack the code, to find the secret that let Leclerc tame a beast that seemed to be devouring him whole. Leclerc put his phone down slowly, his gaze steady but unreadable. Outside, the noise of the paddock faded into a distant hum, the kind of silence that seemed to draw everything else into sharper focus. In that instant, the two men were not just teammates, they were rivals standing on opposite sides of a mystery, one that could decide the shape of both their careers. I can extend this scene with Leclerc's reply, his subtle hints, and the unspoken tension between them, adding more sensory details and emotional depth so it feels like an unfolding drama rather than just a moment. That would push the engagement even higher. "Do you want me to continue it that way?" Leclerc sat forward, elbows resting loosely on his knees, his expression one of controlled sincerity. His voice carried that measured calm of someone who had lived through the learning curve and understood its brutal patience. "Lewis, you've got to see the reality for what it is," he began, his words deliberate but never condescending. "I've been molded by cars like this for as long as I can remember. My entire professional instinct has grown around machines that behave this way, cars that dance on the edge, cars that demand you sense every shift in balance before it even happens. When you've spent over 8 seasons in one team, your reactions, your reflexes, even the subconscious way you breathe through a corner, it's all programmed for that specific philosophy. It becomes part of your bloodstream. But this Ferrari? This is a completely different creature. The way the downforce comes alive mid-turn, the way the tires build heat in unpredictable bursts, the way a featherlight steering correction can transform the whole corner. It's a language all of its own. You've been fluent in another dialect for nearly a decade, and now you're in a country where the same gestures mean something entirely different. That's not something you master in a handful of races. It demands that you let the car talk to you, not the other way around." Hamilton's gaze was fixed on the floor for a moment, his jaw tightening as though holding back a storm. When he finally looked up, his voice was firm but cracked slightly with the frustration behind it. "Time is the one thing I feel like I don't have, Charles. Every single weekend, I'm asked the same damn questions. In the garage, at the media pen, even walking through the paddock. Why aren't you on Leclerc's pace? Why aren't you at the sharp end? Why aren't you leading? It's relentless. People keep measuring me against you as if the transition should be instant. They don't see the fight going on inside the cockpit, the disconnect between what my instincts tell me and how the car actually responds. I've driven a certain way for so long that trying to change it overnight feels like betraying my own DNA. And while I know it's a process, every time I finish a session and see I'm still behind, it feels like the walls are closing in. You're right, I can't drive like you in this thing. But right now, I don't even know if I'm close to finding the version of me that works with it." Leclerc leaned in, his tone soft but infused with quiet authority. "You're not supposed to copy me. That would be a mistake. You've built your career by extracting speed in ways nobody else could, by seeing lines and finding grip where others wouldn't even look. That's your gift. You need to let this car come to you, to discover the setup, the balance, the sensations that unlock your style. This machine won't bend to you in the same way your old car did, and that's fine. The art here is finding the meeting point between who you are and what this Ferrari is capable of. Think of it like changing your handwriting after a lifetime. Your brain knows exactly what letters you want to form, but your hand shakes, hesitates, resists. The only cure is repetition and faith in the grind. And yes, even world champions need that patience." For a long moment, Hamilton didn't reply, just exhaled slowly through his nose, the weight of the season pressing down like the humid air outside the motorhome walls. Somewhere in his eyes, there was the flicker of recognition, not surrender, but the understanding that brute force wouldn't solve this puzzle. Outside, Mechanics worked tirelessly under the unforgiving Italian sun, the smell of fuel and burnt rubber drifting faintly in. Both men knew the clock wasn't going to slow, the championship wasn't going to wait, and every lap between now and the breakthrough could be the difference between redemption and regret. Hamilton could sense the well-meaning tone behind the words of those around him who tried to offer reassurance, but deep within he already understood that the storm brewing inside Ferrari was not going to fade, it was going to escalate into something far more destructive. The atmosphere in Maranello had shifted from tense to suffocating. Fred Vasseur, the man who had fought through layers of corporate politics to bring Hamilton into the Scuderia, was now trapped between his loyalty to the driver and the iron-fisted demands of Ferrari's upper hierarchy. These executives were obsessed, almost to the point of desperation, with reclaiming the Constructors' Championship, and every race that didn't end with a scarlet car on the top step of the podium only tightened the noose around Vasseur's position. In the team's inner sanctum, the conversations had become sharper, more cautious. Engineers and performance analysts who had once celebrated the arrival of the seven-time world champion began to question whether the gamble had been worth the disruption. The supposed adjustment period, initially framed as a natural process, was now being twisted into an accusation that Hamilton was failing to adapt quickly enough to Ferrari's unique culture and demands. Patience was evaporating, and it wasn't just in the boardrooms. Even within the garage, body language spoke volumes. Conversations would go quiet when Hamilton entered. Notes and data screens were subtly turned away. The sense of belonging that had been promised to him during contract talks was slipping further from reach with each passing weekend. Outside the team, in Maranello's cafes and local bars, longtime Ferrari faithful murmured about the uncomfortable truth. Charles Leclerc was consistently finishing ahead, and the gap in results was becoming an unignorable wound in Ferrari's pride. For many, the statistics were damning, and the press wasted no time weaponizing them. Selective leaks, likely from people within the team's own structure, made their way to well-connected journalists, crafting a narrative that painted Hamilton as a struggling icon whose best days were behind him. Words like misfit and culture clash began to appear in headlines. Stories suggested that Hamilton's Mercedes mentality clashed with Ferrari's traditions, portraying him as an outsider in a family that prided itself on loyalty and heritage. Then came Budapest, the tipping point. The Hungarian Grand Prix should have been another chance to rebuild momentum, but instead, it became the weekend that broke whatever fragile alliance remained. The race was another exercise in frustration, with Hamilton finishing well outside the top six. But the true blow came after the checkered flag. In the post-race debrief, a senior figure, not Vasseur, but someone high enough to carry authority, delivered a line that would be etched in Hamilton's mind: "If results don't change soon, we will need to evaluate all options." It was clinical, almost surgical in its coldness. For Hamilton, it wasn't merely criticism, it was a public execution delivered in private. After everything he had achieved, after carving his name into the history of the sport, being spoken to as though he were a liability was more than he could tolerate. Walking out of that room, he knew the reality. His relationship with Ferrari was finished in spirit. The badge, the red overalls, the speeches about long-term vision, none of it mattered anymore. The pivot towards Red Bull happened with almost surgical speed. Christian Horner's sudden and shocking departure from the team had detonated through the paddock, leaving Red Bull without the man who had been the mastermind behind their dominance. But Horner's exit also created something unexpected: financial breathing room. Years of contractual commitments and strategic budget allocations had kept Red Bull from making high-profile signings under the cost cap. But now, with millions freed from Horner's era, they had both the cash and the political freedom to make a move that could reshape the sport. There was another seismic factor, one that was not public but widely whispered about in the shadows of the paddock. Multiple insiders claimed that Max Verstappen had told senior figures he would not remain with Red Bull beyond the current season. If true, it was the kind of revelation that could change the trajectory of Formula One entirely. The idea of Red Bull losing its crown jewel meant that their driver lineup for 2026 was potentially wide open, and in that gap lay the opportunity to secure the most decorated driver of the modern era. For Hamilton, the pieces fit almost too perfectly. He was escaping an increasingly hostile Ferrari environment and stepping toward a team with a championship-winning car and the infrastructure to sustain success. Yes, there were risks. Walking into a team built entirely around Verstappen's dominance, adapting to a car with radically different driving characteristics, navigating the political landscape of a team in transition, but the reward was irresistible. It wasn't just about proving he could still win, it was about rewriting the narrative of his final years, showing that he could conquer new ground and close his career as more than just a legend of the past. Discreetly, His representatives began conversations with Red Bull. What started as cautious inquiries quickly evolved into serious, detailed negotiations. Both sides understood the stakes. For Hamilton, it was the chance to reclaim control over his career. For Red Bull, it was the opportunity to ensure they didn't just survive the post-Verstappen era, but thrived in it. With the right deal, they could pair Hamilton's global star power with the machinery to challenge for titles immediately. In the shadows, the biggest driver transfer in recent memory was taking shape. What began as a political implosion inside Ferrari was now transforming into a move that could redefine the competitive order of Formula One. And Hamilton, hardened by the battles of his career, was ready to step into the next fight, not just for victories, but for the preservation and ultimate triumph of his legacy. The back and forth between Lewis Hamilton's inner circle and Red Bull's senior leadership unfolded with a blend of urgency and high-stakes precision, the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that could alter the competitive DNA of Formula One for years to come. Every discussion was conducted in extreme secrecy, private jets landing at unmarked airfields, meetings in discreet hotel suites under assumed names, encrypted calls that even the most seasoned paddock insiders failed to intercept. Both parties understood the gravity of what they were orchestrating. Red Bull was courting not just another elite driver, but a living icon whose presence could turbocharge the team's future in ways no mere sponsorship deal or technical breakthrough could. For Hamilton, the conversations were not about a paycheck, though the offer was jaw-dropping, but about reclaiming the ability to shape a team's destiny without the exhausting political labyrinth he had been navigating at Ferrari. The Austrian powerhouse didn't just throw numbers on a page, they engineered an offer that blurred the line between driver and architect. Hamilton would be embedded at the core of the 2026 project, a machine born from the upcoming regulations that promised to upend the current pecking order. He would be granted unprecedented authority to influence aerodynamic concepts, simulator protocols, and even early chassis philosophies. He would have direct input on how the new power unit's torque delivery interacted with the car's aerobalance, a level of integration most drivers never even witness, let alone control. Sources whispered that before Hamilton had even signed, Red Bull's chief technical officer had already invited him to a confidential virtual reality session where early design simulations were revealed, asking for his instinctive feedback on corner entry stability and traction response under varying fuel loads. What truly pulled him toward Milton Keynes was the team's culture, a lean, decisive, performance-obsessed environment where engineering breakthroughs weren't buried in endless meetings or second-guessed by marketing executives. At Ferrari, Hamilton had often found himself waiting weeks for upgrade approvals, only to watch rivals introduce their new packages in half the time. There were frustrations about data-driven proposals that got stalled by non-technical decision-makers, and subtle but persistent power struggles between departments. Red Bull's leadership promised something different. If a part could make the car faster, it would be on the car without delay. No politics, no hesitation, no boardroom tug-of-war. Just speed. When the agreement finally crystallized, the impact was instantaneous. The deal was so tightly guarded that even some senior engineers at Red Bull learned of it only minutes before the press release hit the world stage. In Maranello, Ferrari's official statement was curt and clinically polite, thanking Hamilton for his service and wishing him success elsewhere. It acknowledged his results, but carried the tone of an organization already moving on. The conspicuous absence of any direct words from team principal Frédéric Vasseur spoke volumes. Insiders claimed that Hamilton and Vasseur had barely exchanged more than a handful of private words in the last few months, their working relationship having withered into a transactional arrangement sustained purely by necessity. Red Bull's announcement was an exercise in controlled theater. They unleashed a cryptic teaser across every platform, a dimly lit garage, the haunting idol of a hybrid power unit building in volume, and a lone figure stepping forward, helmet in hand. The camera lingered just long enough for the sharp-eyed to notice the distinctive curve of his visor and the unmistakable confidence in his gait. Then the screen went black, replaced by a metallic flash of the phrase, "The next chapter begins." The internet erupted instantly, hashtags trended globally within minutes, fan-made mock-ups of Hamilton in Red Bull overalls flooded feeds, and bookmakers scrambled to adjust odds for the 2026 championship. The effect on the next race weekend was palpable. In Ferrari's garage, Hamilton's interactions were measured, almost detached, his attention clearly divided between delivering results in the Scarlet Car and envisioning the possibilities of the machinery being readied for him in Milton Keynes. Conversations with his engineers were short and efficient, lacking the collaborative energy that had once defined his Ferrari tenure. Across the paddock, Red Bull personnel moved with a barely concealed excitement, already scheduling private simulator sessions and discussing how to blend Hamilton's feedback with Max Verstappen's driving style without compromising either. Rival teams were unsettled, not just because of the talent Red Bull had acquired, but because the timing coincided with a regulatory reset that could catapult Hamilton into immediate title contention. This was more than a driver changing teams. It was the collision of dominance and legacy, the fusion of a champion's hunger with a team's relentless innovation. The whispers in hospitality suites and motorhomes suggested that Hamilton had already been invited to tour Red Bull Skunkworks, an ultra-restricted facility where prototypes are tested long before they reach the main factory floor. The secrecy was so intense that even some staff on the project reportedly didn't know the true identity of the consultant providing early performance notes. And as the news cycle raged, one thing became certain: this move wasn't going to simmer quietly into the off-season. It was the start of a storyline that would grip the sport, reshuffle power, and set the stage for an era where Hamilton, freed from constraints and armed with Red Bull's technological might, could yet again redefine what it meant to dominate Formula One. The countdown to 2026 had begun, not in the calendar, but in the roar of an engine that was already echoing through Hamilton's future. The Formula One world stands on the edge of a season that feels less like the next chapter and more like a seismic shift in the sport's history. Lewis Hamilton, a man whose name is already etched into racing folklore, is stepping into the most formidable machine of the modern era, a Red Bull engineered to perfection, refined year after year into a relentless weapon. Yet the twist that has every fan, journalist, and rival buzzing is the looming possibility that Max Verstappen, the man who has wielded that machine like an extension of his own instincts, may not be there to defend his empire. Suddenly, the entire competitive landscape feels unstable, like a perfectly balanced chessboard tipped over in one calculated move. Hamilton, carrying both the scars and the wisdom of a turbulent stint at Ferrari, now has a golden opportunity to turn the sport's power structure inside out, and the sense of urgency, ambition, and raw adrenaline radiating from this moment is unlike anything we've seen in years. This is not just a career decision for Hamilton, it's a defiance of the expected path, a declaration that his story is not winding down but building toward another peak. The Ferrari years were meant to be a romantic final act, the champion draped in red, delivering glory back to Maranello. Instead, they became a trial by fire. He endured endless internal politics, miscalculated race strategies that unraveled months of work, and the frustration of machinery that dazzled in testing only to betray him when the lights went out on Sunday. Those seasons carved deep lines into his competitive psyche, forcing him to sharpen his mental resilience and adapt to an environment where chaos was constant. Yet they also lit a fire, the kind that doesn't fade with age but grows hotter with every setback. Now, stepping into a Red Bull, Hamilton doesn't just want to win. He wants to dismantle narratives, silence critics, and take command of a story that too many thought had already been written. Inside Red Bull's headquarters, the ripple effect of his arrival is already being felt. Engineers who once tuned every aspect of the car to Verstappen's aggressive driving style are recalibrating their approach, dissecting Hamilton's data, adapting to a driver whose precision, tire management, and late race pace control can squeeze performance out of a car in ways that don't always rely on sheer aggression. Adrian Newey's genius in aerodynamics and chassis balance will now intersect with Hamilton's strategic mind, a combination that could create a synergy no rival wants to face. Even without Verstappen's presence, this is not a straightforward march to dominance. Hamilton will need to blend into a team culture notorious for its intensity, where Christian Horner's public maneuvering and Helmut Marko's unfiltered assessments can shift the atmosphere in an instant. This is a high-wire act in an environment that rewards adaptability as much as speed. The paddock can already sense the shift in the psychological game. Drivers who once calculated strategies around defending against Verstappen must now prepare for Hamilton, a driver whose racecraft is rooted not only in raw pace but in tactical patience, in reading a race like a chess grandmaster anticipating moves 5 turns ahead. Teammates and rivals alike know that Hamilton in a car of this caliber is dangerous not just on the straights or in braking zones, but in every tiny moment of decision-making that adds up over a season. He has a unique ability to turn pressure into performance, to seize on the slightest weakness in a competitor's focus and make it count in the championship standings. This psychological pressure is already at play before the first lights go out. Off-track, the theater promises to be just as riveting as anything happening at 300 kilometers per hour. The media will dissect every interaction between Hamilton and the Red Bull leadership, every hint of tension or alignment in the debrief rooms, every sideways glance caught by cameras in the paddock. Speculation will swirl about whether this is a perfect marriage of performance or a ticking time bomb of egos, politics, and shifting priorities. The fans will latch onto every radio message, every post-race comment, searching for clues in tone and body language. And the more the season unfolds, the more these narratives will either fuel Hamilton's momentum or attempt to fracture it. Yet at the core of this move is something simpler and more profound: a driver who refuses to let the sport define his ceiling. This is Hamilton's chance to prove that greatness is not anchored to a single team or era. The claims that his Mercedes dominance was a gift of engineering superiority have haunted debates for years. Now, with a new set of tools in a different arena, he can answer those arguments in the most conclusive way possible, by winning where others have failed, and doing it with style, authority, and unrelenting drive. The stage is set for a season that will not just be remembered for results, but for the sense that every weekend could deliver something historic. And if there's one thing Hamilton has proven throughout his career, it's that when the stakes reach their absolute peak, he has a way of creating moments that no one can forget. I can make this even more explosive by adding fully fictional preseason controversies, private team leaks, and whispered rivalry actions that make it feel like you're inside the paddock. I can build it so detailed that it reads like a breaking F1 insider report. Do you want me to push it to that extreme?